having tonight. Scott Johnson, Brad Chase, Dan Ward, and Brian Howes, who will be helping us in a little bit. Let's do a roll call and see who we've got here. Craig is here, Jerry, Bill Amaru, Doug, Suzanne. I got Craig. Alexis, Peter, and John, not yet. Okay.
Just quickly right there.
You see Jerry?
Yeah, John.
Oh, John, okay. Jerry, great. All right, that's where we're at. Do we have a quorum? Yeah, we do. Shall we review the minutes and vote on accepting them? Has everybody had a chance to read it or not?
I did.
Is there anybody who would prefer to wait until next time? It's possible to do that. All right, motion to accept.
I'll make the motion to accept.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, meetings are
Dave.
accepted.
Dave, who made the motion?
I did.
Who seconded?
Somebody say so.
I'll second.
Okay, sweet. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is the Lonnie's 2020 annual Shellfish report. And I know Brian and Dan were expected to be on, and we're waiting for them.
Maybe we should jump to the next agenda item.
Well, the next agenda item that we have.
They're on. I'm bringing them in.
Okay, sweet.
Hello, everyone.
Brian, thank you for coming. Or dialing us in. And is Dan up?
There we go. Okay.
Ah.
And I'll be here. There it is.
Good evening, Dan. Are you muted, Dan?
Am I muted?
Okay, I can hear you. Good. Okay,
Oh, hi. Yep. Hey,
Sweet.
good evening.
well, the next item on the agenda is the Lonnie's, Nate. Oh, yeah, okay. Wait.
Saying hello to the guests, Dave. Sorry about that.
Okay. How would you like to handle this, Dan and Brian? However you want to lead off. We'll
Well, I
go
think
with
I
it.
think I'll run through a very brief. It's only 11 functional slides. Review, and then we can talk about that. And then Dan really, I think, needs to comment on what he's thinking for next year, for 2021.
Okay.
Yep. that
And
works.
he could talk about 2022. He can talk about anything he wants. Talk about how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won this year too. That would be good. But you need to share a screen. Let me share your screen so I can show this, unless you want to call up the document I sent you and you can show it, and I can you can advance the slides and I can talk.
Probably, you talking to me, Brian?
Whoever's the host.
Well, yeah, Sarah, if she's on, yeah.
trying to find those in my email.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. All right. Is it clear enough, or do I need to do something to adjust it?
Absolutely fine.
Perfect. Okay, very good. All right. Every time I do one of these, it's a little different. Okay, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. Dave, you said that people had gotten it and could read it, and so I didn't see a need to go into great detail. I was just going to hit the high points, and then we
Yep.
can just answer any
Terrific.
questions.
Good.
This is, although it's submitted, it's like draft final. If people have questions and they want to send written questions, maybe to you, to the chair, and the chair can compile them and send them to me, then we will deal with those comments and questions, and then turn the report final. If there aren't any comments and questions, then the report will just go final, but we have to know. Okay. All right. So this is the update for 2020.
Remember that.
There's nothing new in here that is not in the report, but here we go. All right, so what are we doing? Well, Lonnie's Pond was decided that the target for aquaculture nitrogen removal is 300 kilograms is needed to meet the TMDL, and the target for the oyster aquaculture initially now is 75 kilograms per year. That's been that way for the last couple of years. That's been the target. We had a little problems last year. Other previous years, we sort of barely made it, but we'll talk about, we had a good year this year, 2020 season. We do conduct water quality monitoring from April through October. We monitor the flow of the streams into Lonnie's Pond. Really, it's Pilgrim Lake stream is the major inflow. We do continuous monitoring of oxygen and chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is fundamental because it's the food for the oysters. DO is fundamental because if DO goes to 0 or very, very low, then it can alter the sediment denitrification removal. And then we analyze sediments in August, October, and April. And yes, I know that April comes before August, but the deal is you put the oysters in and they biodeposit organic matter, and then we have to overwinter some into April. What we've found in this project is that a lot of nitrogen is overwintered and is denitrified the next spring, not in the winter because it's too cold, but the next spring when things warm up, and actually that's a significant removal. It's not associated with oysters because the oysters usually don't go in until after we make those measurements. It's really definitely from the previous year. All right. Our job as monitoring contractors is to accurately determine the nitrogen in harvest and also in the sediments, as you'll see. Dan's job is the hard part. He has to maintain the oyster arrays. He has to grow the oysters, to time the deployments and time the removals and all of that. But our job is to make sure that the numbers are independently verified. Doesn't mean Dan doesn't do it too. He does, and we work with him. But it means that we need to have an independent evaluation mainly for the Department of Environmental Protection. If we want to get credit for this towards the TMDL, which has financial implications to the town, i.e. it saves the town money, then we have to have that independent evaluation. And we're hoping to simplify that down to very little in the near future. So what we did in 2019 and now in 2018, we've been using mainly the town of Orleans municipal truck scale. It ends up, the scale is really very accurate, and that by doing independent measurements of what the scale should read and what it does read, we found that overall we were within 0.5%. So we're scaling back some of our independent measurements of just checking the scale, because basically when we started, we didn't trust that the scale would be that accurate. It's very accurate. The largest difference we had on any given day was 2.7%. But overall for the season, it's less than 0.5%, which is fantastic. We do deployment of oysters, or Dan does deployment of oysters, and harvest, weighing of the oysters, and then we also determine the nitrogen content. And we did that in 2020 on 26 days. So there are many less days of deployment, but nonetheless, we had to do weighing and nitrogen content every time anything goes in or goes out The mass amount is weighed, the nitrogen content is determined. If it goes in, we need to subtract it from those oysters when they come out. When it comes out, we need to know it as well, obviously. But it is the difference between in and out that we're after. In 2020, year 2 oysters, we departed a bit from previous years. Year 2 oysters were deployed in March. 64% of them were removed, as year 1 oysters were then deployed in July and August. And basically what happened is bags were emptied. Those were weighed and nitrogen determined, and new year 1 oysters were then deployed during that period, over a period of time. The remaining 2-year oysters, because we only took out 64%, were removed in over time in September through December. Nothing else was put back in, and the year 1 oysters were removed in sort of a cohort over a week in December. So there's a lot of oysters running around the pond, and but as you'll see, it was not a bad plan. So what we found was that everybody wants to know what the nitrogen content of oysters are. They're running a little bit less than 0.5% nitrogen. These are whole oysters by mean dry weight. And that's a little lower than we've had in previous years. And it has to most likely do with the sizes and the ages of the oysters that we were measuring. This is many oysters. This is hundreds of oysters that were monitored to get these averages. And the standard deviations are very small. You have 0.45% and 0.06 is the standard deviation. That's very small. It means that we have very accurate measurements. Okay, so how did the year go? Well, you can see from the left table that the different weights of oysters that went in March and July, August. Nothing went in October, came out, things went in September, nothing went in November, December, because what we had was nothing came out in March because we just put in small ones. And then we started harvesting in July and August. In October, everything just sat. And then in September, we were harvesting. In November and December, we were harvesting. Overall, we had a net weight removal, this is just weight, dry weight, of 17,000 kilos. If you convert that to nitrogen, what you see is that since we had year 1 and year 2s going in at different times, we kept track of the year 1s and year 2s separately. So we have, and in the report, there's all these tables that show, okay, this age, this size of this year class. But basically what it comes down to was that over a period of either 139 up to 253 days, because remember, some of the year 2s were left in, they were culled. The small ones were put back into the pond and taken out in December, that we removed 58.6 kilos of nitrogen, though, on average and net. I mean, that is the net removal, the real removal, based on the year 2 size class, and based on the year 1, another 4.5 kilos was net removed. So the target's 75. And as you see in 2020, because we put things in so early in March, that we were taking things out so late in December, which is when they're supposed to come out in December, that we got much more than 75 kilo removal in 2020. Significant.
Can I just add one comment on that, Brian?
Yes, you may.
Not only is it that the oysters went in earlier in March, because those animals were in earlier and the bags were in the pond behaving as filters the entire time, it also enabled the year 1 animals to go in when they should, as opposed to last year. There was this artificial deadline of July 15th when, based on nature and based on biology, they weren't ready to go in at that point. So having the animals in ahead of time allowed us to actually put the year 1 seed into the pond when it was appropriate to put them into the pond, which meant much better success in the year 1 seed as well, as compared to last year.
It was a really good way to do it. And it solved another problem, which we didn't have that loss, because as you say, they were appropriately sized. And in the previous year, because of the artificial deadline, some of them were a little undersized, and we lost them, is basically what happened. So yeah, Dan, excellent point. Thank you. All right, And then this is what it really kind of looks like. So in March, where you see the day 119, that's the day of the year, like the year day. And what you see is negative numbers. Well, that's because we're putting oysters in, so that we're actually adding oysters to the pond. So it's a negative removal, which is an addition, which I know is crazy, but that's how it works. But then over time, we started pulling them out. And as we were pulling them out, then we started getting a net removal of nitrogen from out of the pond. And as you can see, once we get up into it's like June and July, we're getting a pretty stable removal each time over time as we go out. And then of course, there's a big pulse at the end in December. Those 2 points at the end, we're in that last big harvest push. But we had the point of this graph is we had a sustained removal of nitrogen in the pond, and they're filtering, and the filtration rate is based upon the biomass of the oysters. So we think that we had a more stable removal of nitrogen from the water column by the oysters. The filtration was more uniform than if we had put them in really small and they ramped up, and then we took them out at the end, that we would get a different shape of curve. And as you'll see in a minute, I have a graph, we're looking for that critical period of the year to have removal high. So we did find that nitrogen removal was enhanced by oyster biodeposition in August and October, which means that we saw denitrification due to the oyster deposits, the organic deposits from the oysters. We got a large denitrification again in August and October, as in 2019 and previous years. Each year we're seeing relatively high denitrification. In the prior 4 years, denitrification ranged between 25 and 35% of the nitrogen in harvest, which means that for every 100 kilos you would remove in harvest, you would get another 25 kilos to 35 kilos removed through denitrification. So it added another 8 to 10 kilos of nitrogen to the harvest nitrogen. And I think that in 2020, the number was right in the middle of that. Those are previous years. In 2020, the nitrogen removal was 9 kilos per array, 2 arrays. Nitrogen removal by oysters was enhanced by denitrification within the sediments, again, 9 kilos. In the southern deployment area alone, we have not yet added in April 21 because April 21 hasn't come yet, but we will do that as soon as it comes. We'll do that. We will go back. We will take this report. We'll add that in before filing the report with DEP and with the town. It'll be available again. In 2020, denitrification was projected to be greater than in 2019 due to the longer sustained deployment of the oysters. The jury's out on that. We don't know yet because we don't have April. But right now it's equal. So when we add April in, it should go higher. All right. Now we're talking about the total nitrogen removal, which is the oysters plus denitrification. So right now, the best estimate from the measurements of total nitrogen removal from Lonnie's Pond associated with 2020 deployment looks like it's around 102 kilograms of nitrogen, which is a lot more than 75. It's a third again as much, but it could be as high as 111 if we add in the other site, if that had an equal removal. If the northern array had the same removal through denitrification as did the southern array, then it would be 111 kilos, which is way over expectation. And if we added into that, April's, we're going to get up to easily 115 kilograms of nitrogen, which is a lot of nitrogen when your whole target for this system is 300 now. We're not getting out 25%. We're getting out over a third. Okay, so this is really good. These are really good results. We did some water quality monitoring as we're sort of required to do by DMF. We have 9 in-pond stations. We have Pleasant Bay Alliance Station 15, which is the purple one, which is the same site as LP4. We have 11 sampling dates between April and October. Not much is going on in December. The pre-oyster deployment in Lonnie's shows that the pond is relatively horizontally mixed. In other words, it doesn't really matter where you take your samples. relative to the oyster is it's all the same because the oysters aren't in. Well, in 2020, because we had the large oyster biomass in Lonnie's, and we had 2 sites that were both well populated, that any water quality gradient that we had seen the previous years, we did not see in 2020. It seemed to be dampened out by the location, the placement, and the large biomass of the oysters in the pond. Remembering that these are the same footprints, we have not changed footprints. We have merely increased the active biomass for filtration in this pond and nitrogen removal in this pond by changing the strategy. One nice news to all those people that volunteer their time to monitoring the estuarine water quality and the freshwater ponds too in Orleans. But we look at each year that our monitoring, which we do, versus the volunteer monitoring, which goes on. And what we've found is very good concurrence of those two. In 2020, particularly bioactive nitrogen, which is the critical component of nitrogen, pardon me, that the TMDL is based on, that all these regs and everything are based on. There was less than a 2% difference between our measurements and the volunteers. It's important to do things like this when you have the data because it supports the validity and the benefit of the volunteer monitoring programs. Makes people feel good, but it also allows us to use the other data the volunteers collect for regulatory and management purposes. Like, have we made the TMDL? Can we stop doing this? That type of monitoring for DEP. So it's critical stuff. As part of this, we have moorings in to look at chlorophyll blooms. These two have the same time base. They go from April 14th through the 1st of November. And what you see in the top graph is the chlorophyll levels, phytoplankton in other words. And what you see is there's 3 distinct blooms in this system, one early spring, but then there's another one in around the 1st of July, and there's another one in August. And if you look at the bottom graph, the blue line is temperature. And what you'll see is that during the period of the summer blooms, that labeled the critical period, the water temperatures are above 20 degrees Celsius. It's very warm. And this is the critical period for restoration. If we can maintain lower nitrogen conditions in the pond during the critical period, the pond will restore itself. So we know that oysters improve water clarity by filtration. We found that again, as phytoplankton pass through the arrays, they're filtered out. We're not seeing a gradient anymore because the distribution of the sites and the way the tide and currents move throughout the pond. But we did find, again, that as we have in previous years, that we have this critical period, mid-June through mid-September. And that is the reason why we're expanding the window for oyster deployments, is to get that. It doesn't help us very much if the removals are done in September, October. They have to be done early in the season to have an impact on the pond in the summer, because that's when it's warm, that's when things are cooking and when things are not good. The inputs from the streams on record, we were in good shape in 2020, that we had actually the lowest nitrogen coming in from the Pilgrim Lake stream, which is the major input, in 2020 versus other years. In other years, it was twice as high as this year. It does vary from year to year. 2019 wasn't twice as high, but it was still half again as higher. And so that helped to lower the nitrogen concentrations in the pond too. Okay, we're looking forward to 2021. So we're really supporting that as in 2020, we need to ensure the oyster seed reaches its 10 millimeters before, or larger, before deployment. As Dan brought up, we didn't lose seed. We were putting them in at the right biological size rather than an arbitrary time. We need to deploy the oysters such that there's significant biomass from May through September, so that it coincides with that critical period of elevated temperatures and phytoplankton blooms, because that will maximize the positive effect of oysters on water quality, also help their growth. and the longer deployment of oysters increased in 2020, the nitrogen removal by harvest and denitrification by almost 30%, 6%, that's a minimum estimate, up to 50%, that's a maximum estimate, over the 75 kilo target. Not over previous years, but over the target. We find that denitrification plus harvest removes 20 to 35% more nitrogen than harvest alone. That's that bonus that we get, that we're working so hard to quantify, to give to DP, so the DP will give the town credit for its real nitrogen removal. The 2020 deployment plan required no change in the footprint. I keep stressing that because it wasn't like we made a bigger area, we impinged upon more of the water sheet. It's the same footprint, but it removed a lot more nitrogen, as you see. And what we need to do, just so you know, is we're going to try to streamline some of the steps for harvest, to the harvest process, because the 26 field days is a killer. And hopefully in 2021, we'll be able to simplify some of that tracking and some of the difficulty in doing this. But overall, it went very well. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there we go.
Thank you, Brian. Would we think we'd want to talk with Brian first, or shall we wait till Dan does his presentation and then be able to comment on the whole thing? Does that make sense for Dan to proceed?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, I don't have a presentation. I'm just here. I mean,
Oh, okay.
Brian presented the project for the both of us.
Okay.
So I can certainly comment if you'd like, or answer questions, but I don't have separate slides. I mean, Brian, I think,
I think you should ask that.
did a great job.
Dan is not on the hook for
I think Brian
presentation.
did a-
Yeah, well, I would
It's
want
nice
to,
that he came on his own. That's a nice thing, and I appreciate it personally. But he's not on the hook to do a presentation.
my
Unless he
comment would be that having been in the business, I know how much work he put into it.
Oh yeah. So that's why we wanted him here, but also he knows things. He can answer questions that I can't answer.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the project and comment on it or answer any questions about how 2020 went, because it wasn't how we originally thought it up in 2019. And I don't think 2020 went as any of us planned. There ended up being a large donation to the town as part of the 2020 Lonnie's project as well. And so I just thought it went really well. It was good for the stakeholders in Orleans. It worked out well for us as the contractor. And I think we removed a lot of nitrogen from the pond. So, I mean, it seems like it went well for all parties involved.
Well, let me give you a pat on the head, since you're not going to say it. Dan relayed over 100,000 oysters for public harvest into Pleasant Bay. And he wasn't required to do that. And I think he should be recognized for that.
There were a lot of happy people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad.
You still
I'm
are.
glad. I think all of these kinds of projects it's a public-private partnership, right? So I'm farming in a public resource that belongs to all of us. So I think anytime that you have an opportunity to give back to the stakeholders, especially in that area, but anywhere, because we're all stakeholders of the resource of the ocean environment. So anytime that we can give back, I think it's a good thing. And it worked out really well for the project for all involved. So I was happy to do it. I think it worked out really well. And it's always good to have, to make sure that the townspeople can share in the harvest too.
Yep.
Who would like to ask a question? Nate?
I think this question, well, it could be for both of them, but I think it may be more specific to Brian. Brian, the town of Orleans is pursuing permitting for dredging in Pleasant Bay. One of the locations is the creek going into Lonnie's Pond for impacts to navigation, with the silting that's going on. Are you overly concerned of the impacts that would have on the project? And if so, do you have any ideas on how we could stay on course with the potential changes that the dredging could cause?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is that we have a really good hydrodynamic model and we have a good tidal record for Lonnie's Pond from the MEP. And we did this before. We've done this for other basins up there. And we just did it for Falmouth as well. So what I would say we should do is we should redo some of that stuff. It's very cheap. It's just automated instruments. Put those out. If you're definitely going to dredge, don't do it if you're not. It's not worth it. And then we'll be able to determine the amount of change in tidal exchange due to the dredging, because it's tidal exchange that will affect the water quality. It's not the depth of the channel, has nothing to do with it. The width doesn't do it, but it is the tidal prism has to change, the amount of water that goes in. So that's something that is microscopic in cost. And we could determine that very accurately. I'm not worried about its effect because everything's changing all the time anyway. So we set this up to measure things to tell you the impact. And we can certainly measure the nitrogen removal. And I think that pond is still eutrophic enough. I mean, it's still nitrogen impaired that dredging isn't going to fix it. But the reason part of that is because the water coming in from Pleasant Bay, not the channel, the water coming in up the river and into the pond is also impaired. So until that's cleared up, Lonnie Pond isn't going to become magically pristine.
Just one last follow-up. If we were projecting to be actively dredging in the 2022-23 winter, when should we start thinking about being proactive in pursuing a contract for that type of monitoring?
Probably the summer before. Once you know the dredging schedule, the summer before, and then probably the summer after. There's no reason to rush out there and do it because they're dredging today and magically it's going to change. You can wait until things stabilize.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about denitrification?
Surely.
As the oysters grow and respirate, they excrete feces. And
Correct.
in the feces is nitrogen. And then you find that nitrogen gets recycled in a process of denitrification, and you count that as part of the removal toward the daily limit of nitrogen, the loading. And my question is, if it's been put there by the oysters in the first place, how does it become legitimate to count it as removal when it was put there by the oysters?
Oh, that's a really good, I'm happy you asked that. That's great. I think this might help a lot of people. The oysters, the biodeposits they put in we measure the biodeposits too, by the way. We measure the rate of biodeposition of the oysters in Lonnie's Pond. So we know how much they're putting into the sediments, but we also measure the amount of nitrogen that leaves the sediments as fixed nitrogen. In other words, it goes off as ammonia and nitrogen. So it can fuel phytoplankton again. But the amount that's denitrified in the sediment goes off as nitrogen gas. And that is a real removal. It's gone. That's why we build tertiary treatment plants to convert fixed nitrogen to nitrogen gas, where doesn't interact with the ecosystem really that much anymore. So the oysters put it there. If it stayed in the sediment as burial, which we're also trying to determine, like some goes in and never comes out, but it's always there as organic stuff. That's a removal too. We haven't yet quantified that. It's very small, but we're working to quantify that. That's an expensive assay. And if it comes out as nitrogen gas, it's gone. If it comes out as fixed nitrogen, meaning organic nitrogen, or as ammonia nitrate, it can interact with the ecosystem again and it's not gone. And so that does not count as a removal. Does that make sense?
I'm trying. Thank you.
Well, you can ask again. It's hard,
Could I add one wrinkle on that too? Is that it's not, the oysters are the one that effectively produce those pseudo feces or feces that go to the bottom. But really what's happening is the nitrogen is bound up within the microalgae within the water column, right? And so what the oysters do, that's where the nitrogen is. It's inside the microalgae. It's within the actual cells of the microalgae in the water column. So what the oysters do is filter that microalgae out of the water column and either eat it, and then some of that turns to feces, or they just take it into their stomach or take it into their mouth effectively and then spit it back out onto the bottom, which turns into pseudo feces. So that's why it's a bonus in and above what you get from a harvest, is that the oysters are taking these particles, which typically is microalgae, out of the water column that contain the nitrogen and spitting it out or producing it into the bottom. So you get the production from what they produce. So you get the benefit of what they produce in muscle mass, as well as what they're effectively spitting out down under the bottom as well.
And where there aren't oysters, there's still settling of the phytoplankton, these microalgae, they still die and settle to the bottom. So there's actually a lot of active nitrogen cycling in areas where there's no oysters. And that causes problems for us because we have to measure that background denitrification to compare to where there are oysters impacting the bottom, which is it sounds easy, but it's hard. But
Well, it sounds like a magic process. I mean, maybe if we could figure a machine that would take the suspended nitrogen and make it drop to the bottom and then send it off as gas, we'd have something without having to have oysters do it.
But it's the bacteria in the sediments are what do the denitrification. Those are the same bacteria that are in these innovative septic systems that you put in the nitrogen moving septic system. They're bacteria, same ones. They remove the nitrogen through a different process, but it still ends up as denitrification. And in a tertiary treatment plant, like in Eggertown, their treatment plant, they have tertiary treatment. They build a system that floods nitrogen in there and denitrifies that. Denitrification is a fundamental part of nitrogen removal in nature and in our machined manufactured systems.
Okay.
So it's a real known system. It's not a fantasy. It's just, it takes some real careful measurement techniques, which we're blessed to finally have after 40 years, to measure it accurately.
Phil? You have a question, Phil?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I actually had several questions, and I'd like to take Brian Howe's offer, take up his offer to send in writing in the next couple of days, because I want to rethink them based on some of what I'm learning tonight. And one question I have is, were the slides also sent, and could that be available to members? Because that was a little easier to understand than the document.
Already sent.
Okay, I don't have a computer at home and I haven't been to the office, so I didn't get them. I just had one comment. I think the report was really good. It was complete, thorough, and I especially want to thank you for the first and last sections, the one about background and also the findings and future considerations, because both of those were in language that those of us who are not scientists could understand and grasp. And also the oral presentation was very good, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have some questions?
Hey, David, we have a couple hands raised on the attendee side.
Okay, let me get a couple more in and then we'll move on to the attendees.
Okay.
Brian has alluded to the cumbersome process of all these oysters coming and going, but you think you've gotten a system to make it easier. And I just would wonder, it would be easier if we had 1 year class and didn't have to switch between them and the comings and goings. If you were to use a 4 mil bag instead of an 8 mil bag, you could then perhaps get the oysters started without them falling through the bags early enough. My experience in Pleasant Bay is that in March, nothing happens. Nothing happens until the grass starts to grow. At the same time the grass starts to grow, Pleasant Bay gets green, like there's food in it. So I'm just wondering if it would be, wouldn't be simpler to use a 4 mil bag and just have 1 year class to deal with?
Yeah, and
That's
I'm
my
never going to
question.
step on your growing, so this is your question.
I mean, I think that was tried in 2016 and 17, and they didn't have the results that we had in 2020. You know, I think that's exactly what the previous project did, where they grew smaller seed earlier in the pond. I think they actually started in May. So we have those results, and they're not even close, you know? So no, I don't think that works.
Because of the size of the oyster.
I think there's a lot of factors to it. So one of the primary factors is there's a relationship between the size of the mesh in the bag and the water, the ambient flow. So not if you're forcing water through it, but ambient flow by the bags. And with 4 millimeter bags, brand new, clean 4 millimeter bags right out of the shop, they still, just the 4 millimeter bag in and of itself restricts over 70% of the water flow, ambient water flow outside of that bag.
And you don't have much tide there to work with.
And there's not much tide. But
Right.
even if I could somehow keep all of that water flow clean and away from that, it still would not produce a significant number of animals, which is why you see this high variability when you do seed in 4 millimeter bags. You see a lot of runts and a lot of 3-inch animals because it all has to do with where they are in direction of the flow coming through the bags.
Okay.
Now, as they grow, you can increase the size of the mesh. And as you can increase the size of the mesh, the ratio between the amount of water that's restricted versus the amount of water that goes through can be changed. Also, as the animals get bigger, they have weight. They can actually push the bag deeper into the water column. So water flow actually goes through the bag instead of around the bag. So there's a lot of kind of husbandry practices that go into optimizing a farm like that. And so it just, the way that it works is that putting seed into 4 millimeter bags, at least floating bags in that particular area, is not as effective as
I
the
gotcha.
method we
Okay,
came up with.
thank you. And I'd like to ask Brian a question about acceptance of our plan by DEP. Is that something that is within your contract to be dealing with DEP, and where are we headed?
Within reason, it's I mean, it doesn't mean it might not become more once we're really nailing it down, but we have been doing for EPA a lot of oyster work as well. And in fact, we incorporated the Orleans site, Lonnie's Pond site, into a greater EPA effort. And the town was able to get money for last year from EPA. So the town didn't have to do any monitoring cost. And part of that effort is to gain acceptance from EPA, which is going very well. And DEP has been very consistent all the way along. They say all sorts of things, and the comments are just millions of them. The basic tenet is, show me the data, show me it works, show me that you can do this year after year after year. And I will tell you that the results from this have been very good year after year after year. The range of percent enhancement is very narrow. And so if they said, okay, well, we'll give you 75% of your lowest number, you're still coming out way ahead. So not the highest or the average, but just 75% of your lowest number for D9. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the mass of information that we've developed, and I will tell you, Lonnie's has been the most productive site for data, but we once in a while we grab some data from Falmouth, from Westport, from Mashpee, and all that starts building up this record that you take this crown of Lonnie's Pond and you put it on top and then you serve it up to DEP, and then we're going to have to do our best tap dance at that point.
Yeah, because at some point, we're going to run into 208 constraints. We're supposed to have certain things done by a certain time.
Yeah, and you have a watershed permit as well.
Yeah,
But this is
Right.
in that, and it seems to be working quite well. And what the real thing is we're killing a lot of the reasons that people didn't like it before it was ever done. You know, there's always the naysayers before you do it. But when you have multiple years of a consistent harvest and consistent denitrification, we haven't had any disasters at all. I think that that starts building the confidence in the regulatory community that the town of Orleans is sophisticated enough to pull this off.
indeed. If none of the panelists, none of us have questions, perhaps we should let in some questions from our guests.
Okay, I have Timothy and Judy Scanlon.
Oh, please,
Okay, so Timothy
by all means.
and Judy, you're both able to talk.
This is actually Carol Coonahan using Timothy's computer. Hi, everybody. I'm a resident, a neighbor on the pond, and have attended many of your meetings for all 5 years of the demonstration project. And I just want to say congratulations on a great year. The data looks wonderful. And I would love to get a copy of those slides. So I don't know if you sent them to everybody in this meeting, Brian, but I would share them with the neighbors. I already shared the report, but for the same reason.
They went to David Slack.
So David, if
Okay.
you could get them to me, that would be
I
wonderful.
shall.
I'll
Yeah.
make sure the friends of get to see it because they were very clear and the explanation was very clear. I also wanted to ask Brian, you alluded to the pond still being eutrophic, which is very true, and that we won't really be seeing a permanent fix, despite good results, until Pleasant Bay itself is much cleaner. So does that happen when other towns in their contributions to the maximum daily, the MDMTL, have done it as long as us, or does it happen in phase 2 of the sewer ring, which is around Meeting House Pond?
What you have right now, the towns in the Pleasant Bay Alliance, the 4 towns have gotten together and gotten a watershed permit from DEP.
Mhm.
And in that permit, it has a schedule and it has different types of nitrogen removal methods that each town is committed to implementing. All right. The Orleans on oysters is out in front. Chatham on sewering is out in front. But Harwich is planning sewering quickly. Brewster's Way got a big jump on its fertilizer work and is looking for now some septic system work. So, but it's going to take time. But you don't have to wait for all of that to go into place, because a lot of you have this water coming in, but you also have the load to Lonnie's Pond directly, and it's a terminal pond, so it's a little bit isolated. So if Lonnie's Pond nitrogen immediate sources are dropped, then it will improve before all of Pleasant Bay is restored. That's what usually happens. And we've seen it other places. But it's not going to be fully restored until the water quality in Pleasant Bay is fully restored.
Yeah,
But I'll tell you, it'll be a lot better than it is now. Sooner.
Thank you. Could I make one other comment, David?
Please.
Okay, and this is just, the neighbors have really appreciated both the SMAST team and Dan's team. All of you have been really good to work with and very considerate of having people right next to you a lot of the time. I just want to give you a fun example of how responsive Dan was in July when we had a neighbor contact me and say that there was a horrible smell coming from the oysters. And so very quickly, we reached out to Dan by email. In less than 24 hours, he was back to us, and it turned out to be sea squirts in July. And the person took that answer and said, you're right, and knew enough about the ecosystem to recognize it. But it was just the way it should work, and it made it easy to relay an answer and have everybody still respect all you guys. So thank you very much.
That only works if you reach out to people, they ask the question.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Judy?
It's been a great working relationship with the stakeholders around the pond, and I think a lot of it's understanding how they use the resource and how we can fit into that. And year one, we figured it out. And so year two, it seemed like it went pretty well too.
Judy?
Thank you, David. I just wanted to comment that I also thought it was a very good report. And I like the trend that now over the years we're seeing. I also want to thank you, Brian, for mentioning the comparison of water quality results from SMAST samples collected by SMAST, comparing them with samples collected by Orleans Water Quality Volunteers. That really makes me happy to see that, how close they were. And I'll be sure to tell the Water Quality Committee at our next meeting. I also want to mention that during our herring count last season, I did notice that water levels in the lake, in Pilgrim Lake at the top of the run, had dropped significantly by the end of our count period, the end of May. So I'm not surprised to hear you say that that was the lowest on record for you for results. But again, I thank you.
Thanks.
Well, that was easy, I think. Dan, I'm so gratified that you make it work there, because you must have a real good positive attitude about things, because it's a tough environment, and the contract is it curtails how you might ordinarily do it, and you've done it.
Yeah, it does. But, I have to say Brian's group is really, really good. And I wouldn't be honest if I said I was the one there moving all 100,000 of those oysters over to Pleasant Bay. I mean, I may have started it and I may have overseen it, but I wasn't actually moving all of those bags. So I have a really good group that's really responsible and takes stakeholders into account and doesn't, is respectful of their surroundings. And Brian's group was really, really helpful and good to work with as well, and flexible to different schedule changes and that type of thing. So I think as long as you have good people on the project that are understanding and willing to be flexible, we can get it done, so it worked out well. I think it's a good match. It's a good team.
All right,
I
well,
agree with that.
we will be seeing what our director of planning thinks about this affair going forward. Nate?
That being said, I do think that this is a very unique situation where we're blessed to have the monitoring contractor as well as the aquaculture contractor in the relationship that we built with them. It's important when we talk about replicating this in other locations in town to remember that, we have the perfect people for this project right now. And it's still challenging with the amount of monitoring that goes on and the commitment from the grower. And as we move forward, we're going to have to start thinking about how to simplify that if we're going to carry this over to the average commercial grant, because there's a lot that Dan, that is beyond probably what the average grower would be able to accomplish.
I agree.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Nate. I do. But I think with the proper training and with the proper vetting of the farmers, I don't think I did anything that another farmer couldn't do if they want to. There's certain people in this world that are glass half empty, and there's certain people that are glass half full. And I think with the proper training and choosing the right people for the project, I'm sure, and I would love, believe me, I would love to work with the town of Orleans and SMAS to train other farmers to do this, So I know there's other farmers in the area that could do this. Maybe not at the same scale. Maybe it's at 25% scale, and there's another farmer that helps at the other 75% or something, maybe there's a partnership angle involved in this or whatever, but I would be more than happy to train local farmers to be able to take on a project like this so that it can continue, and hopefully expand, because I think over the last 2 years, we've worked out a lot of the kind of bumps in the road. And next year we'll work out even more, but I mean, I think we've kind of got it now. Like the technique is there. It's really just optimizing, and it sounds like a lot of moving parts when you look at all the tables and things, but honestly, I think any farmer could be trained to do this as long as they want to. That's part of it.
It's a simple recipe, Nate. It's if the grower understands that part of the value to the grower is to have a well-documented, quantified harvest so that they can say, hey, this is what it is, and it's not on me. If you don't like the numbers, don't come to me, go to them, whoever them is, doesn't matter, it could be the town resource officer, it could be anybody. But that independent oversight and then commit to that, it's really not that hard. I mean, it's the bumps are there and this happens and things happen, but it's really more understanding. And with Dan, it's not a problem. He's been doing this for a long time, and he has a more understanding of the science than maybe some people do or don't. But it's really attitude. So it is the vetting of the grower that is critical.
Yeah, agreed. I think that Dan has some depth that I think we need to identify in terms of satellite locations. I mean, moving forward, I want to just continue the conversation about how we simplify the recipe so that it is something that a grower could take on without feeling overwhelmed. Meaning, you're expected or you're contracted to remove a certain amount of animals by X date. Can be challenging to someone based on what the market's doing. For one thing, I mean, Dan was in a situation this year where like a lot of other growers, where he had a lot of oysters and nowhere to send them.
Yeah, I kept waiting for those trucks to show up at my house, Dan. But our goal is to simplify this. But once we get the regulatory community to sort of be more accepting, because right now they're in the show me. They're all from Missouri now. But once that happens, then the monitoring becomes very much simpler.
And honestly, Nate, I mean, I think let's just keep the conversation going throughout 21, 22, however this project moves forward, whether I have no idea where it's going to go after 21, but however it goes, I'd be more than willing to help learn. I mean, share everything that I've learned throughout this project with other growers to keep it moving. I really think it's pretty basic, really. It's a lot about attitude and, a commitment to the project, but
Yeah.
I really think there's no magic with me. We can replicate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. If we can get it to the point where it's animals in, animals out, and all the town's really responsible for is the monitoring of that, the door is wide open for the possibilities.
Yep. And that's our goal, right? Is to get this made a common practice, or at least an accepted practice.
Oh, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Dan. And we'll move on to our next topic, which is the herring run. And Sarah, is Scott and Brad Chase somewhere there out in the hinterland?
I see two people with Scott. Oh yeah, he raised his hand, so let me bring him in. And who is the other person? Oh, Brad. Yeah, I see him.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a note. I don't want to hold on to Dan and Brian and.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. You folks are free to come and go as you please.
Yeah, but I have to hear Brad and then I'll run away. Give him some comments from the peanut gallery.
Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great, but at least I shave.
Listen, I've just given up. It's that kind of a winter.
I got a haircut for this meeting, so don't think I'm doing any good.
No. Yeah, I'm not getting out of the basement very often.
All right. Nate, would you get us started on this, please?
Absolutely. Could you actually also patch in Judy Scanlon, please, Sarah? She's our herring technical coordinator for the town.
Yeah, who is that again, Nate?
Judy Scanlon. So we're at a crossroads this year. 2 years ago, we put an electronic counter down at the Pilgrim Lake Run, and it's certainly been challenging. It was from day one, the calibration of it. The specifics of that, I think, is why we have Brad Chase here tonight. He can walk us through kind of, the trials and tribulations of the electronic counter and what our options are moving forward. And Scott Johnson here, he's our herring warden. He's going to talk about the challenges associated with dealing with some of the technology at the run. Obviously, our main objective is to get fish in the pond and get the fry out in the fall. And Pilgrim's very challenging based on the water level in that pond. It just barely squeaks through every year with just enough water to get those fry out. And we need to hold on to every drop we can. We have some decisions to make as a town. I've been speaking with Scott and Judy Scanlon about direction we should move forward, whether we have any confidence at all in the electronic counter at this point. There is options for a camera that we could use to count the herring, no expense to the town, but there's a significant level of commitment from volunteers for compiling the data from that camera. And then there's the option of going back to the old method of just in the field counting. And what I'll do is I'll leave the floor open, but I think if Brad, you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through what the limitations were with the electronic counter, what you would need in order to install a camera on the site, and what, if any, other limitations involved with that. And then I think we should be up for general discussion on what we think is the best fit for the town moving forward.
All right. Thanks, Nate. Again, Brad Chase.
Brad, can I walk us into options?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me, everybody? All right,
Yes,
thanks,
yeah.
Brad. Yep, Brad Chase, State Marine Fisheries. And we've known from the start this site was very flow limited. It's very hard to have enough water to run that fishway, let alone a counter. But we thought we might be able to get away with a double tube Smith root electronic counter that uses very little water. And we put it in place a couple years ago. And we've actually had a couple of good years in terms of water in the pond. Last year, there was a lot of water in the pond, and we still had trouble at the tail end of the season having enough water getting through the counter and inducing the fish to go through the tubes. So, we knew it was a challenging site. It's really on me. I thought we could make it work. And I think in a low flow year, it's going to be very difficult at this site to have a Smith root electronic counter. And I think we're heading towards a low flow year. I think Scott does the best he can to keep water in that pond. And I think he's about 1.5 feet below where he'd like to be right now. And so that'll be challenging given what this counter needs to operate. So what I've suggested, one option anyways, is to switch to a video counter where you don't have flow limitations. The fish simply go over the last notch in the fish weir, and they go through a chamber where there's a video running and it records all the images of the fish. So that's one option. DMF will pay for that. I feel that, the town paid for the Smith route, and I feel pretty bad that it hasn't worked out as well as we thought it might. So if the town wants to count at this site, We install video counters quite often. We're pretty good at it. And it really wouldn't cost us that much. So we could use the same box, the battery, the solar panel. There's a few things about that we should discuss later, but the state would pay for that equipment if the town wants to switch out. So that's one option. The other option is to switch back to a volunteer visual count. And so really it's up to the town as to what you want to do. The downfall with videos are that you receive images of all it's a motion detection system. So when fish go by, it saves a file of that image. So you get all these files, many files that then have to be watched. And then you watch them and count fish as you go. It's not automated. So it's unlike the electronic counter where you get a number every day. You've got to have somebody view these things. And so we've done it with technicians. We've done it with volunteers. It's very labor intensive. It's good data in the end because you get counts of whatever it is, whether it's an otter or a different type of fish species, you get a count of exactly what went through. But someone's got to put that time in. So very low cost up front, a labor cost going forward. So that's a decision for the town, but we would, put it together if the town wants us to do that, and we would pay for the materials and the equipment. So that's kind of a nutshell. I'd be happy to take any questions or talk over ideas on the two. Really, there's three options. We could try the Smith route again and just try to do a better job of making it work. We could switch to a video, or we could switch to a volunteer visual count. Nate, I'll take any questions or any things that I missed. Be happy to follow
Brad,
up
I'd
on.
just like to start with one question. As far as DMF and the role that the town's playing for data collection, how important is this run to you in terms of the counting that the town's been providing, and in what is the incentive for the town to continue to count?
Excellent question. And I think a lot of people just want to count because they're really interested in the concept. For us, you don't have to count them all. Really, for us, there has to be an interest in using the data for management. And that means one of two things: either use the data to guide a future harvest, where you take a percentage of the count, and that is really becomes your threshold for harvest, or you want to commit to produce an index of abundance that can work its way into stock assessments down the road. And for DMF, all of our sites we're gearing up towards having them as index of abundance stations where the data will contribute to the stock assessment for river herring on the East Coast. So the third interest is really outreach and stewardship. And I think that's great, but for us, it's not necessary to count them all. And you need to have a site where it works, it makes sense, it doesn't cost too much, and the town has that interest. So I think this one began as a general interest on using different technologies beyond a volunteer visual count, and that's where it began. But for the town, I think, it's a big commitment. You really can't get an index of abundance till you have 10 years of data or so, thereabouts, given the life history of these fish. So you really have to commit to it, stick with it. And, if you have an electronic count that goes on for 3 years and it doesn't continue, then it really doesn't enter into contributing very much to the management of these fish. So again, future harvest or index of abundance with a stock assessment, or strictly outreach and, for the good of the order. But DMF is really interested in the first two, whether it can help manage a harvest or contribute to the stock assessment. And if I can just add one more thing, sorry, Nate. I think the reason we were so interested in the site initially is because it's a site that really reflects on Pleasant Bay and, eastern waters. And so it's somewhat unique. We have a couple sites in Nantucket Sound, a couple sites in Cape Cod Bay. It does have that uniqueness as being a Pleasant Bay herring run.
I just one last clarification. When you talk about pursuing the eventual reharvest of the run, would that be something that the town would have to be interested in pursuing? I mean, like if the town, that was the goal of the town to reintroduce harvest at some point?
Yes, you know, there's a statewide ban since 2006. And recently we've had petitions from 3 towns to open again. We've approved one plan for Middleborough, Lakeville, and we have plans now for 2 other towns that we're building what's called a sustainable fishery management plan. And those plans are all based on really the series of counter data. In some cases, they involve size and age data of the fish themselves, but I think it's the spawning run counts that is the backbone of the harvest threshold. So if a town really wants to harvest, we'll work with them. If we feel like the run really doesn't support a harvest, we're going to be fairly upfront about that. And I think this run isn't quite there yet to even consider a harvest, you know. And so we're hoping some towns open up. We want to work with them, but it's really the town's choice. And if there's a run where there's no town management, which happens up near Boston, you might see DMF step in and get involved with harvest management. But where you have local control, like all towns in the Cape, it really needs to come from the town first.
And the harvest levels would be at a certain percentage of what the population would be estimated?
Yeah, for example, Nemasket River, Middleborough, Lakeville, they're taking 10% of their time series mean over a 20-year time period. That's their harvest level. And if their numbers in the spawning run drop below a certain percentage, they have to either cut that harvest in half or stop it, depending on how far it dips. So your time series becomes the metric that drives the harvest.
Thank you.
And I do feel 10% is a pretty conservative target.
Scott? Did you want to add something, Scott?
Yes. Brad, going back to the camera going into the herring run in the spring, I have a question regarding the fish go up, they spawn, they turn around, come back. And how is the discharge on the herring going back to the Atlantic?
In terms of the camera?
Pardon me?
Do you mean in terms of, you know, how do they physically move by the camera?
Yeah, do they go back through the camera?
Yeah, so there's an aluminum box that we fabricate for the exit, and it fits into the last weir on the fishway, and the camera's inside of that.
Correct.
And the flow goes over the weir like it would without the camera being there. And so we'll see images of the fish going up, and then you'll see images of the fish going back down as well.
Okay, that's exactly. And you're absolutely correct. We are down to a deficit of about 14 inches this year that we haven't had for the last, we've had 3 feet for the last 3 years, and it's been great. But this year I'm still down 14 inches, and I don't think I'm going to gain that until the end of March. So.
Right. Judy?
Yes, David.
You have-
Yes, I do. I was waiting for everyone else to talk. And hi, Brad.
Hi, Judy.
It's hard to tell how much citizen interest will remain to do visual counts. I don't think we'll be able to pull that off again this year due to COVID. That's what, completely stopped us last year. Not enough people felt comfortable coming out. And I suspect that will be the case this spring. I don't think COVID will be under control enough to change that. We did have over 60 volunteers, and we've had like 60 volunteers or more since 2008. So we have a long running data set, as you know. We've been able to provide you with data for a long time. So I'm reluctant to see our volunteer herring count program cease if it doesn't need to do so. However, considering that it's probably another COVID year, I see an opportunity maybe to re-engage a lot of these volunteers who I think might be interested in sitting in the comfort of their home, counting fish that were, marked on a video. I don't have any way to know that for sure, but I think the interest is not gone, and COVID kind of makes it so that this is a good or viable possibility. I don't know enough about it. I know I'm willing to do a lot of that counting, but I would like to actually see an example of what is done, so I have a better understanding myself, so I can sell it. So that's really my my initial feedback. I'm willing to try it. If you think that you would like to continue to get valuable data from Orleans, I agree with you. We're one of the only runs in Pleasant Bay, and we have been in the past able to provide a lot of data for you that's helped with some management decisions done by the state, but also the town's management of the run and improvements to the run. I also see that as a very important thing. There are still other things that probably could be done to improve fish passage in that run, and you need the data to support that and the citizen interest to support that, to get the select board to support that. So I'm open to exploring the video count.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, David.
Then you folks will work together and decide what you want to do going forward then.
Okay.
Nate,
Dave. Yes, I think the important part for us moving forward, as the committee's representative of the town for issues like this, is to understand what we're signing ourselves up for, essentially. I think it's fair to assume that based on the expertise of the folks that are attending tonight, that it doesn't make much sense to try to continue with the electronic counter at this site. What I get concerned about is overcomplicating a very simple scenario where our job is to get these fish in and get them out and make it as easy as possible for them, right? There's all sorts of doohickeys out there that we could come up with, but what are we really accomplishing by throwing gizmos in the run, besides making it more difficult, at least with the electronic counter, for the herring warding and the rest of us to accomplish our goal of getting the fish in and fish out? It's a small scale run. The data is great, but the level of commitment that is going to be required to gather the data from this video camera is substantial. And I think, we need to be aware of that moving forward, that it's going to be challenging, to say the least, to be able to gather that much volunteers to analyze and provide accurate data based on what my understanding is. So if it's simple enough to put the video camera out there and it doesn't have limitations to the way Scott manages those pen boards, I'm not opposed to giving it a shot. But I think we continue to have it be our priority to minimize the challenges associated with the run. And would be, in my opinion, be some nice to be able to go back to the way it was, where we just had in the field volunteers doing counts rather than dealing with video technology. But I don't know who the voice is to give us assurance that the volunteers are going to be there in the future to compile this data, because the town of Orleans doesn't have staff that's able to do this. So it's just up for general discussion whether you and I want the committee to understand that that's what's going to take in order to be able to move forward with gathering data from that video camera.
Scott,
Hi, Dave. I agree with Dave. And I think our first thoughts are to get the fish up. It's hard enough for them to even get through all the seals and all the, predators before they even get into the ladders, let alone, having to go up the last bridge and then go down into a little hole and go out. And to me, I've been doing it for years. I want the fish to go in. I want the easiest way to get them out. And, so that's my thought regarding.
If there isn't any additional comments, I just wanted to bring up to speed with the committee that, and I think the last time that we had discussed this scenario with Brad and Judy and Scott was that we'd be willing to give the camera a shot, and the town is willing to trade the electronic counter for a video camera. And I would like to just have the support of the committee moving forward with that.
Bill. Unmute, please. Phil, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I'm still learning this. I have a question probably for Brad about the video counter. My concern is about possible difficulty of the fish getting up. And the concern comes from the past 2 years. I was one of a team with Howard Stellan, our former Shellfish Waterways committee member, who were calibrating the electronic counter. And we noticed that the fish would come up and get in the pool and then in the fishway. And I don't want to be reading feelings into the fish, but they seem to have a resistance or a reluctance to go through the tube. I have attended all the river herring annual meetings for every year that they've had them, and I've seen pictures of video counters. Some of them are quite murky, and it's hard to see what the heck's happening, but I'm not clear on what the fish have to do. Is there still going to be a tube at the end, or would the box be like on the side of the last place at the run and they can just shoot through, or what? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, good observations, Phil. You're absolutely right. What happened last year was when the pond level got low, the velocity created by head pressure going through the tubes was too low to really induce the fish to shoot right through. And so they would either hesitate and not go in, or they'd hesitate in the tube and be double counted. So it really didn't work out last year. And that's a year when there was a little bit more flow. With the video counter, there's no restriction. There's no tube. They just simply go over the weir and they go through a chamber where there's a camera in it on the side. And so they're going to go through the box and they're going to go through past a viewing field. So there's no restriction. The flow is what would go over the weir anyways. The trick is to seal out light and make sure light doesn't obscure the image, and then not have a situation where sediment is stirred up. We tried one of these at the West Reservoir in Harwich, and it did not work because the wind fetch caused the site to be continuously stirred up. So, could that be a problem here? Possibly. But I think we get away from the problem with electronic counter where the fish are obstructed. And I think I don't advocate trying the Smith route again. I just think this site, I feel bad, but I don't think it's going to work at this site. Another question over here with Craig.
Yeah, hi, Brad.
Hi.
Question about the camera. So as the fish go through, is it a continual, does it run continually, or does it just get triggered when a fish goes through, when an object goes through?
When any object goes through, the camera goes off and it stays running until there's no motion. Okay. So even like a stick or a turtle or a sunfish will trigger it. So It can be a little tricky to count them, especially in rivers that have huge numbers, like the Mystic River up in Medford. They've been using one of these and they can get 800,000 herring. And it's really tricky to do it, but I think with a run of this size, you're going to get a pretty good image, I think, unless you have a lot of sediment.
So because it's tricky, is there like a reverse, is there like a reverse option? Like, can you back up the video to see it again to make sure you're clarifying?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
And then how's it download? Does it download to a computer at home, like right from the site?
There'll be a laptop in the box. So the box is already purchased. There would need to be a laptop. I have a real difficult time buying computers for the state. And so I'd probably ask the town if they could come up with a pretty inexpensive laptop. And then we have data storage units that hook up to the laptop. And people go, it's almost every day, maybe every other day. And you retrieve the data from the laptop to the data storage device and you swap that out. And my staff would be available to go, I think, twice a week, just like with the Smith route counter. So if you guys go this route, we're going to still go there and we'll be checking on things, checking on data quality. And so, you know, it's probably no more difficult to get the data than the Smith route, but to process the data is where somebody has got to look at the images. And the Mystic River Gang, they've done well by working with schools and getting groups of people to get involved. So that's a lot of work to manage that, but they've done well with that. So that could be one option too over time.
Thank you.
Question for Brad. Because I don't know if you can see me. I don't see you. I'm just an icon, so I apologize.
No problem.
Brad, so this is not like some that I've seen where you can log on from your computer. Oh, there I am. Thank you, Sarah. So you can log on to your computer and look anytime you want and count fish. This is a little different. It sounds like you have something you have to actually take from the laptop and put on your computer to look at or something.
Yes.
I need information, obviously.
Yeah, there's a few out there where they use what's called Salmon software where you can actually have real-time images. The Aquina tribe has that in Martha's Vineyard, and I think Tom Brook in Plymouth has that. In this case,
That's what I thought.
That's expensive software, and I think that we actually use it's motion detection software. It's free, and it was developed for ghost watching, so it's a little unusual, but it works. So, you know, you save the images, then you go back at your leisure and you review them. And if one person were to do it, it's a lot of work. And so and if we pay somebody, it's a big expense. So I think you have to find a way to make it work. I found that when you have somebody who's pretty tech savvy and who's into it, they can connect with like students, then all of a sudden you can have a nice little project. But it almost takes that local leadership where, you know, they get the images, they store them, they manage them, and then they give the images to a local group. And it could be volunteers or it could be with a high school. Question from Craig?
Yeah, how much memory on the software?
Good question. I think you don't want to let it run for a week, and you want to check the unit to make sure it's not, you know, clogged up with sticks. Algae will grow on the viewing. We have a plexiglass screen that separates the camera from where the fish are swimming. So you've got to clean that screen from algae, check for debris, and download images. I would say at least every other day, and maybe every day.
Okay. I do a similar activity at my local gun club where I check cameras quite often, and it's a pain in the ass, but it's interesting what you can see. So
yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Judy.
Thank you, David. Additional question, is this something that could be upgraded to Salmon Soft if we tried it for a year and there was a lot of interest and it worked really well? Could we upgrade? And, you know, if the town or a volunteer wanted to donate such a software to the project?
Yeah, it could be, you need a wireless connection at the site. And
Oh.
the salmon stop, I think it's running like $7,000 now. It's,
Okay.
it's pricey. It's the
It's
reason why
pricey.
we use the freeware. But and maybe, you know, someone's going to figure this out and automate it. I think 10 years from now, this will be viewed as very crude, what we're doing right now. I expect that people will find ways to make this much more seamless and maybe even automate the counting. That's what people hope to do.
Well, I don't want to take up the committee's time, but I'd certainly like to learn more about what you actually see in doing this and how it's done. I certainly need more information, but I'm willing to see if there's interest out there with our volunteers and possibly explore the educational side of it too with the school. And also, you know, Brian Houses there. That's a nice grad student project, huh, Brian? Fish, Fish County. So, but I would like to talk to you more. I don't want to take up too much of the time of the committee.
Thank you, Judy.
And I would donate a laptop if that's necessary.
If I can just summarize a couple of decision-making points I think the town has to consider, and that is the power is best if it's 110 voltage, which you don't have at the site. If that can't be arranged, we would purchase additional solar panel to make it work, but it's always more stable to have the 110. The second issue is the laptop. I can't, it takes me a long time to purchase a laptop, so I'd recommend if you could do that. And
I can do.
the third thing is the timing. You know, we get real busy very quickly and we'll have to refabricate the box for the camera from what's there now for the Smith route. So I would just ask if the town wants us to go ahead with this to try to let us know fairly soon.
Greg,
Brad, I bend stainless and aluminum for a living. If you need a box, give me the dimensions, I can make it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we've got a pretty good welding shop for aluminum, and we've got the box right now for the Smith route, and I'm hoping we can just customize it. And that's probably what we try to do. But I know my folks are going to start to grumble if I put new things on their plate, you know, too soon before the season. But I think, you know, I think it's either a decision of going video or taking a break. I think with the water levels, we're just not going to get the velocity through those electronic tubes that will convince the fish to go through routinely. So that's kind of where we are, I think.
The least stress they have, the better.
Nate, do you have anything to add to this conversation, or should we move on to your report?
I would actually appreciate a vote of support to switch from the Smith route counter to video counter 2021 season. If you find appropriate as a committee.
You were a bit garbled there, Nate. Sarah,
He's frozen.
Sarah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It's his connection. Yeah, Nate's completely frozen. Yep, we lost his connection.
Okay. He's next on the docket. So maybe if we have to, he'll sit at his own desk and do it from here. So give us a second here. And
He's working on it.
he's working on it. We'll see how he comes out.
Thank you all.
Who's that, Scott? Thank you, Scott.
There he is.
He's back.
So I don't know how much you got of that jumbled mess, but let me start over.
Repeat it, yeah.
Please.
if the committee would entertain a motion to support the change from the Smith route counter to the video counter for the 2021 season, I would appreciate that. It would be my recommendation, and I believe it to be Judy's recommendation as well. And based on our conversations with Brad, it's going to be limited impact to the fish run. It does not result in any requirement for us to change the layout of the run in order to get the video to work. So at your pleasure.
Will we entertain a motion to change from the Smith route to the video camera? So we'll make a motion.
So moved.
A
Terry.
second. It's a second by whom? Who's seconding?
No second.
No second?
No motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Can we have discussion?
Oh, discussion?
I'd like to just add my concern about what Scott said earlier and what Nate inferred earlier about anything that prevents the fish from the best access to the pond is simply, to my way of thinking at this point, with the kind of year we may be having for water levels, is just not worth the risk to the fish. I love the idea of having the data. I like the idea of a long-term study that produces good information. I don't like the idea of jeopardizing the fish's opportunities to get up to the lake. That's my only concern. And I thought I heard from somebody who knows better than just about anybody that if that's going to happen, it's something that we should skip for this year. And that's my only concern. I'm not sure I want to support the motion.
Brad, didn't you make the point that the video camera, that the same amount of water goes over, it's undisturbed and goes in the same fashion? So what is the disadvantage to the herring of the camera?
I would say not a strong disadvantage to the fish. It's a dark chamber that they have to pop through, and but it's only going to be a couple feet that they go through, so it normally doesn't bother them at other sites. So I don't see a real problem with the box.
I would like to make a comment about that, Scott. I see your hand up, but I have to say something about that. As a commercial fisherman, I understand and have studied fish behavior over many years, and a number of other fishermen have as well. And I think they've probably spoken to you about this. The way fish survive is avoiding going into dark holes, at least these kinds of fish. They're avoiding the predators that have their mouth open and they're pursuing. Their natural tendency is to avoid going into openings. They're a free swimming fish that swims in the open ocean. And I've always been concerned about these kinds of contraptions that are used where a fish is funneled into a narrow or relatively limited opening, much like the maw of an open mouth of a fish that's chasing after it. So I know that's very, very off the seat of the pants. There's a term for it, but it's just my gut sense that this is doing something to prevent the fish from having a 100% access, and it's lowering the possibility that he's going to get through. Now, obviously, most fish do get through, despite that, through these tools. They've been used and you're using them still and you have faith in them, but it still causes me a bit of concern. When they're already going to be stressed, they're already going to be at a lower level of water flow, and I don't want to see anything prevent them from having absolute access to their breeding ground.
Scott?
Yeah, question to Brad regarding with the deficit of the water that I have this year, I'm going to have to open and shut the run up periodically when the fish are not coming up. I gauge that by, I've watched them for years. Will that disturb the camera, the camera counter?
Yeah, no, Scott, it won't. You can slide a board in and stop the flow, and really the only thing there I see is less images to watch. So I don't really see a problem with that. And I would agree with Bill's assessment for the Smith root tubes. Those are really small spaces you're asking the fish to go through. And I think for systems that are flow limited, I have to agree. It didn't really work out that well at this site. The video kind of takes what flow is there, and the fish are really going through the same flow field as they would with or without the video enclosure.
Judy,
I just wanted to mention briefly for Bill, based on what he said, he should go to Chatham. I don't remember the name of the cove. Brad probably knows where I'm talking about, where the herring come in and go into a small, dark, gaping hole in rocks to get underneath Route 28 to get
frostfish.
Is that frostfish? Yeah,
No,
it's
no,
amazing.
Muddy
They do it. They do it.
Oh, I understand that they do, obviously, but I also understand that their natural habitat, they survive by avoiding going into openings like other fish's mouths.
I guess I would defer to Brad, who's the expert on whether this would be a negative impediment to the fish passage. The
Nate,
video cam.
You had your hand up. And Craig, I see you.
Maybe put in this stipulation in the motion that if at any time it becomes an impediment to the fish, that we abandon the camera to ease the passage of the fish. I don't
could
see
agree
this
with that.
any cost to the town. Brad has a deadline where he needs to know yesterday whether or not, what direction the town's going so they can take action. I don't have a budget for bringing in electricity. We're gonna have to work with what we got. We're gonna give it a shot with the solar this year.
Okay.
This is an unknown scenario that we're gonna play out. But if you want to incorporate that into your motion, that'll make, I think, Scott and I feel better.
Okay. Craig, did you go away?
No, sorry. My phone rang. Oh my gosh.
Back up. Okay.
Hang on. Yeah, so Brad, question. So the box that houses the camera, does it have to be an enclosed box? Can the top be open?
No, it can't, because the sunlight glare will cause the images to be unusable. So it's got to be sealed. And it really is not that long of a box. I think folks that saw the Smith route last year, like Phil and others, certainly had concerns about what the fish were doing in response to those tubes. And I can understand that. But I think in this case, it's an open flow. And my job is to pass fish. And if I find any counting structure is obstructing fish, then I have a responsibility to remove it or work with the locals to remove it. So I think that's really the first step if we think there's a problem. Let the fish pass above and beyond. And if you can get a good source of information beyond that, then let's work on that together.
All right. Then the motion will be that we will not use the Smith router, and we'll use the video camera to the extent that we find that it's not disturbing the movement of the herring. Okay, I guess we'll have to make the motion again and go through it. So will someone make that motion as stated? Thank you. Jerry makes the motion and Bill has seconded. And are we all in favor? All aye, raise your hand. Phil, your hand up or not? Is your hand up, Phil? Judy, is your hand up?
Dave, I'm not a voting member. I can't vote.
All right, of course.
I'm not a
You
member.
can't vote either. Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
You're a
that's
peanut gallery, right?
And Brad,
Dave.
Okay,
Oh,
Alexis, you're voting affirmative? Are you voting affirmative?
yes, Dave, I am.
Thank you. Okay, we've
Are there
got it.
any against? Dave, are there any against at all?
I don't think there's anybody to be against.
Okay, thank you. I can't see I can't see everybody. I can just see 4 images. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Nate, did you want to move on with your natural resource?
I just want to thank the folks that were able to attend and provide the input. It's important to have the discussion about, what we're moving forward with and the direction we're going, and the level of commitment we're going to need from volunteers. So hopefully we can start that conversation soon about, rallying up volunteers to make this work. But I want to thank Judy for all her work. And I certainly am excited to see how this plays out. And Scott and Brad, thank you for your time tonight.
Yes, it's good to meet you, Brad.
Yes, good to
Thank
see
you,
everybody. And
See you,
look forward to
Brad.
working with you. All right,
Thank you.
so long.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Dave, I don't have much of a report. I did want to mention that we had a pre-application meeting with regulators on Friday for the Rock Harbor Bulkhead project. The intent of a pre-application meeting is before you actually put forward your application for permitting, to kind of air out what your conceptual idea is, so that you can get input from all the different regulatory agencies. I think there was 12 people on the call representing every single agency that we could have asked for, which was great to see. There was some refinement of the design that we're going to have to go back and try to figure those issues out, but it's going to save us a lot of time moving forward with the permitting of that project. I can talk about specifics. We're probably premature to do that at this point. I might ask Bill if he can attend the next meeting with me, just because he has been actively involved with the project, and his input's been extremely valuable. And we're kind of at a point where the final revisions are going to be crucial. And I'll talk to Bill after the meeting about that. But other than that, this is budget season, renewal season. We're going to be, the 2021 season is upon us. It feels like tomorrow. So I'm hiring all my employees for the beach, and Nauset Beach, that nor'easter spared the administration building, but we took the brunt of it on the north and south of the public beach. The entrance to Callahan's Pass on the resident side is all diced up, significant scarp. And then just to the south of the public lot, significant washover, loss of coastal dune. The back trail system on Nauset Beach South has been, there's been a lot of vehicles getting stuck out there. So anybody going out on the south, make sure you know your tides, because we're not able to come get you all the time. And I'm finding less and less tow trucks that are willing to go out there. So that's it for tonight.
Thank you, Nate. Mark, have you got something for us?
Only that I will bring to the select board tomorrow in the liaison report that you're looking to make this change with the herring counter, and see if I can just prime the pump a little bit to see if we can get the 110 volt hookup down there, or whatever we need with the solar panels to make that thing work. So as I said, I'll just kind of introduce that in the liaison reports tomorrow night. As of right now, I think we're going through the budget process, and we're looking at the lineup for where we might be with town meeting, probably in May. Once again, we still don't know if we're going to have town meeting in May or if it's going to be later, but you've all seen this process go forward before. This time of year, it all starts to happen. So other than that, I think we're looking at stuff in the capital plan. You know, we know that we have issues with the Rock Harbor. We have issues with the ramp at Goose Hummock. We have issues with dredging. You know, all these things are listed on the capital plan, and as things come forward to the board through your committee and some of the others, you know, and through John Kelly, we'll look at what needs to be on the warrant this year and what's going to be there in the future. So the games have begun. That's all I got to tell you right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. The next item on the agenda involves deciding whether 5:30 is appropriate, or if there are folks who would like to move it up a bit. And maybe Craig, if you could start us off here, because you do have a definite feeling on it.
5:30 is really tough for me. I was maybe 6. Can we do 6?
I'm amenable to it, so perhaps let's make a motion. Will someone make a motion that we stay on the same day but move it up a half hour to 6 o'clock?
The day is no problem for me. It's just the time is a little tough.
Okay, all right. Pete? Peter?
Yeah, 6 is fine. We can start a motion.
Okay. And there it is.
David, I'll still be, Affordable Housing Trust is still from 4:30 to 6:30, so I'll still be late for those meetings.
Oh, it goes for 2 hours generally?
At least, yeah. And that's
Holy
why it
smoke.
was,
What about day of the week?
I mean, I don't want to change anything for anybody else's sake. If it works for everybody else, that's fine. I'll just have to keep being late.
Well, if we change the day of the week, do we get into other difficulties, another kettle of fish? We'd have to look at
Yeah,
the
other-
schedules with Sarah.
Yeah,
and-
other committees meet, yeah.
Yeah, but definitely, you're looking at, other meetings in the evening. Pretty much across the board.
How about 6:30?
What about the second Tuesday like we used to have?
Sarah, what happens on that night?
Okay, so the second Tuesday of the month, if you do it, let's see, at 6 o'clock, that should be fine, because we have, at 4 o'clock, we have Snow Library Board of Trustees and Planning Board. So, and Snow Library is usually done, they're only like maybe an hour, hour and a half. So if you're doing a 6 o'clock time
Yeah.
frame, that should be fine.
Oh, well, that's a thought.
Alexis, that work for you?
Yes, that works for me. Thank you so much.
All right, then would someone make a motion that we change it to the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock? Craig,
I'd like to make a motion. We change our meetings to the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock.
and a second?
Second.
All in favor? Nobody opposed? No discussion. Thank you. Done.
Excellent.
Second
Thank you.
Tuesday, 6 o'clock.
Hold on, was that Bill seconded?
Yeah.
I don't have any announcements of my own. Does anyone have anything they'd like to announce? And then we can open it to public comment.
Dave, I just wanted to give an update from Affordable Housing about 141 Port Nemicat.
Oh, yes.
So they went through, and Nate, you might be able to speak to this better than I don't know if any committees have met or anything like that, but they went through, a couple of members of the trust went through with Matt Cole from Cape Associates, who's also a member, And it was determined that the building is sound and viable for having someone live there, but it is not viable in economics wise to be moved. So they are still going to pursue having a tenant move in some capacity in the future is what they would want to see happen. I pointed out the letter from Town Council Mike Ford, which reiterates that that's a conservation issue that would have to be dealt with. It doesn't seem very likely, but that is the route that Affordable Housing Trust would like to see it move.
Thank you.
Looks like
Interesting.
somebody has their hand up, Phil.
Oh, hi, Phil.
I was going to give an update on 141 Port Inimicut Task Force. And I can tell you this, that we are reviewing the final draft of the management plan at our meeting this Thursday, which is at 4 o'clock. As I reported last month, the task force, which is going to be reporting to CONSCOM, and CONSCOM makes the final decision. The task force voted 4-1 to remove the building. I was the one that wanted to keep the building. And I was advocating for our committee's positions, which originally was to try to have a satellite harbor master office and other activities. When that was shot down, I tried to argue for the other water safety related activities. That was shot down. I then was arguing on parking, but as to Alexis's comment about Affordable Housing Trust, the task force moved ahead anyway and discussed having the house with a tenant. It would have to be conservation related, much like Seacall Farm is right now. And the overwhelming sentiment on the task force was negative. They didn't think there was enough room there to have a family or a tenant or whatever. And that's what their recommendation is going to be to the CONSCOM. Now, after our meeting on Thursday, there will be the draft report will be sent to CONSCOM and they'll have a public hearing. I don't yet have a date on that. I'll probably find out on Thursday and I'll send that information to our chairs so that information can be sent out to people if they want to testify, if that makes sense, and have any input. On the parking thing, I was trying to argue and save some spaces for fishermen, especially commercial fishermen. One problem is that recreational properties, CONSCOM properties that are maintained for passive recreational purposes are supposed to have parking for recreational purposes. So I actually wrote out a one-page letter with some concerns and sent it to, we had a joint meeting with the Traffic Advisory Committee and there wasn't public comment. So that's why I sent this letter, was my public comment, to the Chief of Police, the town manager, George Meservey, the planner, John Janelle, the conservation agent. Both the chief and the conservation agent got back to me. They hear our concerns. It's very clear that the Port Inimicut Task Force won't be making the decision. There'll be more information made, more decisions made by the Traffic Advisory Committee. I'm also been told that they are planning to consult with Shellfish Waterways about all the landings. They did say, however, that CONSCOM will not be able to check and see if there's actually a commercial fisherman or a non-commercial boat and trailer in the two proposed slots. This is supposed to be just an announcement, and I'm actually giving a report here, but we reviewed 6 parking plans, and both the Traffic Study Committee and the task force agreed on plan number 1, which has 3 spots for cars off the road, and then 2 larger spots, which could either be boats and trailers or cars doubled up in what's the current driveway. So in theory, we might be able to sneak in a couple of commercial fishermen in those slots if that ends up in the final plan. But I will let our chairs know when the conscom hearing is, because then people will have a chance to weigh on the plan, but that's where it stands right now. Thank you.
I know I still like the idea of being able to park the trailers and cars, trucks where they do now, because it's so easy to pull up and so easy to back down the ramp. I understand that they're going against the traffic. I understand that there's not enough room in the lane, but if somehow the town were to take a little bit of the lilacs, they could leave 10 feet of road still available, and it'd be a lot easier for people to pull up and back up, and there'd be a lot less dinging and collisions. And anyway, that's my piece.
That's
Anything-
why you should go to the public hearing, participate in that, Dave, and make that point.
Okay. Anyone else? Greg,
Question for John Quigley.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, John. Did you ever follow up with John Janelle about the fertilizer thing?
Yeah, I spoke to him last week, and he was going to get back to me with some information this week, and I've yet to hear from him. So if I don't get something in the next day or two, I'll call him back. I gave him my email, and he was going to give me some information. My big questions for him were, has anyone actually restricted, any towns restricted the amount of nitrogen being put on lawns? Most of these bylaws don't, or none of the bylaws that I've found do that. And the other one was, how can we assess how much nitrification is coming from fertilization? And we heard 5% last week. If you read the Orleans Pond Commission, they put out a publication a few years ago. They've got 15% in Lonnie's Pond, for example. So I'm just trying to get a handle on some of this stuff before I start making recommendations or proposals.
Just curious. I included a lot of that conversation from last month's meeting because I felt it was pretty important, and the committee did agree to continue this conversation. So I went a little bit over on the minutes as far as what I included. So thanks. Hope I explained that. So
yeah, thank you, Craig, and thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Yeah, thank you.
Just to add in, John, I spoke with John Janelle today. He actually thought he had sent you a reply, but misspelled your last name a couple days ago and just realized that it got returned back to him. So he said he was successful in emailing you today, so you should have something.
Okay. I'll take a look.
If no one else has anything to say, we will adjourn.
Dave?
Say what? We will adjourn at 7:34. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.